for joining us today to dive into Leadership is a Contact Sport. I am Andrea Levinson from the team here at Executive Performance Partners. Over the next hour, we're going to take you through a framework that we use in our performance partnering, in our day-to-day work with clients, that we really believe helps turn the dial on success, performance, and achieving outcomes. If you have any questions along the way, please do jump into chat, drop those in there. We are aiming to finish with enough time for some questions and diving into any queries you might have and some application at the end of this conversation today. But please don't let those thought bubbles pass you by. All right. Let's get started. So what are we actually talking about today? Success for us in this session is really about giving you three lenses through which you can consider your leadership. And we're going to share one key principle of leadership growth, supported by research and our practice with our clients and their practice in their organizations that really helps drive results. We've got a big focus today on giving you practical tips and tricks. We're very clear here at EPP that our value isn't in our IP, it's not in thinking about things differently, it's actually in helping people do things differently and turn that thinking into action, building some leadership habits. With that in mind, we're going to be giving you actionable tips and tricks. So success for me is meaning that this afternoon or tomorrow, you're able to do something differently in the way that you lead people. We're going to give you some clarity on how you can create a process around your leadership and also a tool to help you define and measure success as a leader. We've also got hopefully a fun and interesting value add for you at the end of this session, and we'll share that with you after as well. There's a little leadership as a contact sport assessment that you can dive into, so do stay tuned for that. Okay, so I mentioned that we're basing today on a piece of research, but certainly also our experience and practice of meaningful leadership contact, or leadership as a contact sport. So at EPP, we bring a very strong business psychology background, lots of consulting experience, and in this particular container or business, we're bringing that to the market in the lens or through the lens of performance partnering. Now, this is a new way of thinking about executive coaching. We're focusing on performance, retainer-based model, lots of action-based advisory. So we're talking with leaders, business owners, CEOs, and executives on a week-to-week basis around how to turn the dial on their performance. That access to real-world issues, challenges, and hurdles gives us a great sense of what's actually happening out there in the world and room to test and trial and play with different approaches that can drive performance or drive impact as a leader. Through that experience, we can see really clearly that a lack of clarity, not having clear measures for success, and being able to drive accountability are some of the biggest challenges, roadblocks, and hurdles that our clients face. Core to these challenges is communication and consistent, meaningful leadership contact. Yeah. Thinking about your leadership as a contact sport, and I obviously mean contact here in the sense of interacting with people as opposed to, a physical full-on body contact sport, but that consistent contact and interaction and engagement with people is one of the biggest tips, one of the biggest levers that you can pull to drive your leadership performance. So, leadership is a contact sport. What does this actually mean? If we think about leadership as being defined as working with and through others in order to achieve objectives, You obviously don't need to have a formal leadership role to lead. Now, I think this idea is gaining a lot of acceptance these days. This sense that no matter where you are in the organization, everybody leads, whether it's yourself, whether it's projects, initiatives, whether it's through your professional experience and exposure, or maybe you are leading a business, maybe you are leading a team. If we think about it this way, the tips, tricks, and approaches that we're going to talk to today are something that everybody can play with. So definitely keep that in mind. So, leadership is a contact sport. This phrase was coined by Marshall Goldsmith and his colleagues in a piece of research and subsequent HBR and other articles that they pulled together, looking at what distinguishes success in leadership growth and development. So if you're going to up-level your leadership, what are some of the common components or some of the common pieces that are going to help you to do that? Now, this research was international. It was across a broad range of organisations and fairly large, significant organisations as well, and across multiple levels within those organisations. The key finding from that research was that ongoing dialogue, so ongoing interaction and conversation, was a significant, consistent variable in achieving long-term change for leaders and achieving long-term growth and impact or outcomes. So if we stop to think about that for a moment, there's a lot of complexity in the world of leadership. There are a lot of really powerful frameworks and tools and things that you need to think about. These days, at the moment, we're really focused on creating psychological safety. You know, how can you be brave and vulnerable in your leadership? There's some really beautiful work coming out in those spaces, as well as a lot of really foundational, consistent leadership frameworks. So it's quite easy to become lost in the complexity of leadership. And that's without even necessarily appreciating that people in and of themselves, certainly, look, I'm a psychologist, I appreciate this fully, we are all quite weird and complex and wonderful and different and unpredictable. And whatever type of leader you are, you're dealing with that. So allowing for all of that complexity, allowing for all of that variance, if we can anchor into this one variable that you can leverage to up-level your performance, contact, dialogue, and communicating with the people around you, that can be really powerful. Let's try and create some simplicity and some focus out of what can be quite an overwhelming field. Ongoing contact and communication as the linchpin for great leadership. What does that mean? How do you actually put that into practice? We're going to talk about that today. So, what does the research actually say? For those of you that are a little bit more data inclined, I've got a couple of slides and graphs here for you. This first one, if you're in a relationship with a leader or a colleague or a team member, and this person does no follow-up, so no meaningful ongoing contact, you'll see the middle of that curve there, that 0, is there's no change in performance, there's no growth in performance. Then if we think about what that looks like with a little bit of follow-up, so some spidoric contact, a little bit more dialogue, you start to see those graphs shifting to the right, which is in the direction of positive, meaningful, impactful change. Still not a big difference though. Finally, if we look at what this looks like and means if someone does consistent or periodic follow-up, you can see we're right at the end there. We're getting maximum change and growth and difference or improvement in performance and in growth. Hopefully that helps really land into this idea that consistent, periodic, ongoing contact and dialogue is one of the simplest and easiest levers that you can pull as a leader of others, of organizations, of leaders, in order to drive performance and increase your own impact. The core of meaningful leadership contact, there are 3 lenses or 3 pillars that we will talk to today. Essentially, leadership is a relationship as much as it is a process, as much as it is an outcome. So taking this idea of ongoing meaningful contact as one key focus or takeaway, then let's think about these 3 pillars or buckets and what do they mean, and how do we actually enact each of these? What I love about this framework is you can take all of the tools, tips, tricks, the frameworks that you already know and love, and pair them back to this way of creating some simplicity and cutting through all of that complexity in the world of leadership. Leadership as a relationship. So are you able to ask the right questions of your team, recognizing the power of the personal in the communication? There's a beautiful article that is probably getting a little bit old now from the team at Harvard Business Review called Connect Then Lead. I think that was Amy Cuddy and some of her colleagues. Even just the heading there helps us ground into this sense that ultimately leadership is a personal human enterprise and interaction. We need to be able to have a connection, have a relationship with the people that we're leading before we can endeavor or hope to actually drive to get some results. Leadership as a process is really leaning into this idea that it's a consistent exercise. Yeah. What is the ongoing process, the ongoing follow-up factor that helps you have consistent, meaningful contact? Yeah. Finally, leadership as an outcome is all about building a shared understanding of what success looks like. Yeah. Beyond KPIs, pulling in what the organizational vision is, or what the strategies are that you're hoping to execute. What does success really look like for this person in this role? What does success really look like for your team right now? Certainly in our practice with our clients, we focus on a short-term time horizon. We define that success or define that outcome on a 3-month basis. Yeah, essentially working in shorter term sprints. That clarity helps cut through the complexity and the volatility of the world around us. I've just seen a question in chat there around that HBR article. It is Connect Then Lead. Thank you, Moretta. It's one of my favorites. It's a really valuable read. Okay, so we're going to talk through each of these pillars and dive into some tips and tricks that might be able to help you in each of these areas. And remember, if you're wondering where you might go first in terms of those overall 3 pillars, the Leadership is a Contact Sport assessment, which you'll have access to at the end of this webinar, and you can share with the people in your community as well, may help you do that. And you'll probably get a bit of a sense from thinking about the topic where you might naturally be inclined to have some strength and where you might naturally need to spend a little bit more time or effort. So, leadership as a relationship. I love this quote by Peter Drucker. The leaders of the past was a person who knew how to tell. The leader of the future will be a person who knows how to ask. And there's no better way to understand the people around us, to build some connection, than to be curious, than to be interested, than to ask really lovely, open questions. So I'd love you to think at the moment, just reflecting on your own interactions, your own conversations, what percentage of those discussions are telling, which is essential, you need to do some of that in leadership, versus asking, seeking to understand, appreciate, and explore. What's you talking versus them talking to you? Okay, so our first actionable tip from today, actively focus on asking more questions, particularly if you find that you are in that position of being a solution vendor, your team or people are constantly coming to you with questions, using you as Google, so to speak. Then definitely lean into some more questions, get them thinking, problem solving for themselves, and buy yourself back a little bit of time eventually. It's one way to slow down, to speed up. So if we work through others, then we obviously need a relationship of some sort, yeah? And we've learned a lot around what makes people tick and what is really meaningful. And if we think about that from a leadership perspective, people work for leaders who care. Yeah, we want to know that we have a genuine connection, that we're seen, particularly post-COVID, if we can call us post-COVID now, that the leader sees us as a whole human being. We can bring our whole self to work. All of these things necessitate a sense of connection and a sense of caring or awareness of the human in that equation. So personal contact, not just task-based contact, really matters. And if we think about working in a hybrid space, if we think about working remotely, this takes a lot more intention than it does in the office. Certainly, I'm in the office with the team today. I've had a lot more conversations, a lot more broad touch points, a lot more laughs than I would normally have on those days when I'm working remotely. I love both of those ways of working, but fundamentally for different reasons. So if you are hybrid, if you are remote, how do you bring in intentionally that personal contact? Where does that sit for you? Now, I just want to jump back here for one moment. If we take a neuroscience lens, yeah, if you are in a formal hierarchical leadership role, then just your status, just the position power that you hold creates a sense of threat. It creates a sense of vigilance in the people around us, and that shifts the way that we think. It can take us to a more problem focus than a solution focus. It can make us more black and white in our thinking as opposed to open and creative and innovative. So all of these things can be challenging when we're wanting people to problem solve, when we need to get that extra bit of creativity or innovation out of the people around us. If we need to pivot, for example, it's really hard in that space. The more you can connect and build some relatedness and a nice clear relationship with the people around you, it helps mitigate some of that impact. So that's a really nice way to help overcome some of the challenges of just the way that our beautiful brains work. So for the moment, I'd like you to just reflect, how has meaningful contact changed your own experience and how you lead? If you think about the leaders that you've really enjoyed working for, that have had the biggest impact on you, your career, and your life more broadly, I would posit that you probably had a stronger personal connection with those leaders. This does not mean that you have a big social connection. You can absolutely respect the professional boundaries here. That doesn't negate a meaningful connection. So how has meaningful contact changed your experience, and what can you take or learn from that? So leadership is a relationship. One way you can show you care is asking for input and following up to see if there is progress. So asking for input, again, is leaning into questions, yeah, engaging people through conversation, and following up to see what happens with those ideas, to deliver on something that you may have committed to, builds trust, yeah, brings people closer in, and really helps to hardwire that relationship. We also know that attention in and of itself can drive results. They were classic when I was studying, so they're definitely classic now. But the good old Hawthorne studies showed us that just attention, leadership interest in what's going on increases productivity. Yeah, just by observing, just by asking a question, just by giving something attention, you can quite heavily influence the performance of those around you. Yeah. If we think about connecting with people, that also really leans into the narrative at the moment and the thinking and work around psychological safety, vulnerability, Brene Brown, Amy Cuddy's work. All of this really connects quite nicely into this idea of leadership as a relationship, first and foremost. So some tools that we use in our work that can constitute making meaningful contact, or some ways of thinking. The first one here is, what's my 51%? Now, previously, I've worked in spaces where we've had this language around what's my 50%, you know, what's my half of this interaction, this challenge, this conflict, this problem. We like to turn the dial and challenge that just that little bit more and say, what's my 51%? Because this really leans us into thinking about, how do I take the first step here? Yeah. So if we're at loggerheads, if this relationship maybe isn't as great as I want it to be, if I've got a difficult person working on my team who's difficult because they're just different, or, you know, we're not seeing eye to eye, or we're not getting the results, how do I take the first step in leaning into that and moving towards a solution? Yeah. Without someone making that first move, it's like the guys on one side of the dance hall, the girls on the other side of the dance hall, everybody wants to dance and play, but nobody's asking anybody to dance. Yeah. So what's my 51% is a really useful frame. It's a really useful thing to ask yourself, particularly for situations that might be ongoing. Yeah. What can I own here, and how can I take that first step? 30, 60, 90 is a framework of iteration and co-creation that can also help you have some more regular conversations and can be helpful in building a shared understanding of success. So 30, 60, 90 is essentially saying, hey, I'm going to use Romana, who's in the room here with me. Can you please go away and create a 30% version of this? You know, hopefully you're clear on what we're trying to achieve. Let's build a straw man. Let's get that first rough draft, just a 30% version. Then we have another conversation, review that, and iterate towards a 60% version, a 90% version, for example. Much more contact, much more co-creation, much more opportunities for positive and constructive feedback in that conversation than saying, hey, can you go away and deliver me something by X? And then potentially invariably you get it and it is not what you thought it might be. Yeah, 30, 60, 90. Yes, if is the last tip that we will share here under leadership as a relationship. I think you all know, if you hear no or but, that kind of gets our defenses up and we get ready to go and advocate for the thing that we are asking for. Instead, as a leader, can you use yes if? Yes, you can have that project to lead if we can make sure that you're still able to deliver these other key goals and outcomes within the timeline. Yes, client, you can have that project at that price point. That's what that's going to mean in terms of quality. Are you comfortable with that? Yes. Ultimately, most things are possible if we're willing to negotiate around other priorities or show some flex in some other areas. And that helps us have a really deep conversation about ultimately what we're trying to achieve here, yeah, and what the priorities might be. So yes, if can be a nice conversation starter. So how are you going right now? I'd like you to take a moment to reflect and maybe write down a score here. Based on the last few weeks, how well do you feel you have demonstrated leadership as a relationship? Yeah, the lovely Holly is going to put a poll up here. We're using a 1 to 5 scale in the poll. 1 to 10 on slide, completely fine, whichever works for you. So let's see where everybody is at. Oh wait, no, it is 1 to 10. I apologize. I just needed to scroll. Thank you. Okay. I'm just going to close that screen. Okay, what's it looking like, Holly?
A lot of 3s, So in the middle.
In the middle.
In the middle.
Oh, someone's gone a 9. Awesome, love it. So it sounds like there's a bit of variation. There's a bit of variance here. Not surprising, yeah? Not surprising. So if this is one that is average or lower in terms of how you're reflecting on your practice right now, then I would really encourage you to lean into how you can up the ante on your connection and on your relationships. It really is the foundation or the bedrock of all of the other tips, tools, strategies that you might be using to actually deliver results. And obviously, we're in organizations and business and roles. There are things that we want to achieve, particularly if you're doing that through people. Investing in those relationships is not going to be something that you regret. Okay. All right, let's dive into leadership as a process. So relationship is key to leadership. Hopefully we've shared some tips, tools, and insights there that can help you connect more meaningfully. Leadership as a process is about how to create a clear process or add some follow-up to your practice of leadership. I love this way of thinking. It's not about what you know, it's what you consistently do. It's one of the reasons we focus on layering leadership habits, consistent behavior change to up-level performance. So the great challenge of leadership is not understanding the practice, it's practicing the understanding. Process and having routines, habits, or rituals can really support you here. All right, leadership is a process rather than a one-off event. And I know you probably all know this, right? Leadership is not something you can do on a Monday morning and then not worry about for the rest of the week, or do in your town hall once a month and then kind of turn off and focus on doing. It's not an event. It takes place and forms over time. In other words, it's a process. Key to that process is practice and action. Practice and action. I love the word practice because it means that we're not expecting to be perfect. In fact, this expectation of being perfect and getting it right first time or even all of the time, I think is quite detrimental to us being able to consistently step up and lead as well as humanly possible. But if we think about what we might do to get fit, watching a video of someone exercising will not get you fitter. We all know that. Reading a book on how to be a better leader, and I love reading and focusing on development frameworks and new ways of thinking, absolutely valuable. But just reading that book or that article is not going to make you a better leader. It's about how you put that into practice. What are you actually going to do with that? And ideally, what are you going to repeatedly do with that? So leadership involves a reliance on co-workers or people in your team to achieve outcomes. The role of a leader is to facilitate the success of others. Focus and enable the success of others. So whether you lead a formal team, projects, or through professional influence, that's the mechanism that you are using. The mere act of committing to follow up inspires more commitment. We touched on trust and talking about leadership as a relationship. Having a consistent practice and process around your leadership helps you build that trust. And certainly if you have a new team, if there are new people that you need to lead, finding ways to make small commitments very, very early on and then delivering on those as quickly as possible helps build a sense of trust, connection, comfort, demonstrates our integrity. So that can be a really useful way to get some momentum really quickly. So people don't trust what they can't see. More touch points makes your leadership more visible and suggests that you're invested in leading that individual, in leading that team, and in their success. Okay. So what does that process look like? If you were to pull up your calendar right now and have a look at all of the touch points that you may have with the people that you lead, can you see time for leadership in there? Yeah, that might look like a team meeting. It might look like a project meeting. It might be your regular one-on-ones. Hopefully you have those. It never ceases to surprise me how many leaders actually don't. Yeah. How do you build that consistent contact? And where we invest our time is a really powerful reflection of our priorities. So if you're saying leadership and supporting your team and the people around you to achieve the outcomes that they need to achieve, or you need them to achieve, is a key priority, and you can't see a lot of time allocated to that in your calendar, then that's a really challenging, probably, maybe uncomfortable, but useful reflection to have. Yeah. Is where you're spending your time a reflection of what you're saying your priorities are and what you value most? Key call out here, contact can be virtual. It can be in real life. Yeah, it doesn't necessarily matter. If you are virtual or you are hybrid, though, it does mean that we need to be a little bit more intentional. And carve out some more habits or ways that we can bring people into connection really quickly. And there's certainly been a lot of lessons learned over the last year or two, and I'm sure a quick Google, if you need to, will give you some beautiful ideas there. So make sure you've got one-on-ones, make sure you're having those conversations, and you know in each interaction when your next touch point is going to be. What does that cadence look like, and what does that process look like? So let's think again. How are you going right now? Based on the last few weeks, how well do you feel you've demonstrated leadership as a process? How well are you following up and maintaining consistent, regular contact with the people around you? Do you have one-on-ones, and are you sticking to those, or are they the thing that gets bumped out of the calendar to make way for other things? You know, when time is precious, where do you spend it? So Holly's launched our next poll here. So jump on in, have a think. 1, not at all, not doing a great job of this. Yeah, not visible, not following up. Versus 10, really well, acing it all over it. Binjay's the 7, great. If you're kind of feeling like you're average to lower here, what are 2 or 3 things that you could do, or even 1 or 2 that you could do to start shifting that or nudging that forward? Do you need to really protect your one-on-one time? Do you actually need to change how you have your one-on-one conversations? Have you asked your team or each individual what success in that conversation looks like for them? Do you have a clear sense of what they want and need from you? And that's a beautiful example of pairing leadership as a relationship, with leadership as a process. Yeah, respecting you as the unique individual human that you are in this process time that we have together. What do you need from me? What am I doing that's holding you back? How might we make our time more valuable? Is weekly effective for you? Would you rather more time, less regular? Like, what does that actually look like? Okay, could be really useful reflections to have. And certainly the first couple of times you ask some of those questions, you may get blank stares, you might not get particularly insightful answers. That's completely okay. It's not surprising, perhaps, that the number of people who have never actually really thought about what they need from their leader or from that time together, or what success looks like. So commit to asking that question a couple of times, and you can certainly signpost it and say, hey, I'm going to try something a little bit different here. You know, I'd like us to up the ante on the power of the time that we spend together. I'm going to ask you a question. If you don't have an answer today, then hey, reflect and we'll come back to it next week. Not only are you demonstrating commitment to follow up, leadership is a process, but you're also kind of saying to them, hey, I'm asking you this question. You can't just bum me off right now and say I don't have an answer and not think about it, because I'm going to come back to it. I actually really want you to put some time into that, and I want us to have that deep, meaningful conversation. Okay, follow-up matters. All right, how are results looking, Holly? Better or worse than relationship? Up or down?
A little bit better.
A little bit
more
better.
Around the 7 area.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So there's a little bit more of a sense of, hey, yeah, we've got some follow-up, we've got some cadence. And like, I think in a way this leans into the work a little bit more than the relationship. And if that is you, then certainly thinking about how you can up-level relationship might be helpful. If you are naturally a more relationship-oriented person and follow-up or follow-through or process isn't necessarily you, then I think hopefully today this is a nice little reflection point for you to go, yeah, so I'm not great with structure and follow through, and I like a bit of freedom, but you know what, if I'm going to be a really impactful, successful leader, then maybe I need a little bit of that, and to just, you know, change that frame of thinking a little bit. All right, let's talk about leadership is an outcome. I really like this lens because it starts us having conversations about what we're here to do together. What are we actually trying to achieve and deliver, and what's the impact that we want to have, and how do we get a really shared understanding as a leader and an individual that we're leading around what that looks like. Yeah. And I've sat in rooms with lots of teams and individuals across all levels and all industries where they can't actually articulate an answer to that question. There might be a list of KPIs, there might be a list of projects, but not necessarily a really clear sense of what success looks like. So leadership as an outcome, we like to think of this as the scoreboard. Yeah, if you're playing a team or individual sport, there's always a scoreboard. You know, you have a sense of how you're going. There are some rules of the game. You know how you're going to score points, and hopefully you've got some aspirations about what score you might want to achieve, or just the fact that you want to, you know, outscore the other team. Having that clarity is really powerful, and I appreciate not always straightforward. I like to call out here that intent and impact are different. What we want to achieve, where we think we're going, kind of what's in our head, and where we think or where we intend to lead our team is not always the same as the impact that we're having on the people around us or their understanding of what that is. So defining what success looks like, and particularly doing that in a conversation and co-creating, can help close the gap and make sure that we're a little bit more aligned. Can be really helpful in building some shared language, but certainly in investing effort and prioritizing in a way that's going to get us to the things that really matter. Another way to think about leadership as an outcome is if we could only achieve 20% of the things on our radar right now, that's going to give us 80% of our value, what might they be? Yeah, I think for pretty much all of us, there are a never-ending list of demands, projects, tasks, things that are pulling on our time. Getting a really clear sense of defining success helps minimize some of those distractions and is really useful if you're going to have that yes-if conversation. Yeah, this is what I'm striving for, Mr. or Mrs. CEO, happy to pivot over here. Yes, I can do that if we're okay to renegotiate around this definition of success. The outcome of that is going to be that I won't be able to necessarily hit X or Y in these timelines. This is what we need to flex, adjust, or change. Does that sound good? Is that desirable or not? Once you know the impact you want to have, you can harness the power of appreciative inquiry to be able to figure out how to get there. So appreciative inquiry is a way of diving into how do we achieve our goals, or how do we get to the outcome that we want. Essentially, you ask the individual on your team or the person that you're leading to envision that sense of future success. So in 3 months, if we were able to do the best job possible and surpass expectations on project A, what would that look like, feel like, smell like? How would you know when you got there? Let's just project into the future and imagine that we've been able to nail it. Yeah, how do you feel? What does it look like? What are you seeing? What have we delivered? And then reflect back on, well, what are the key steps that got us to here? Now, starting from that future orientation and that sense of success and working backwards means that we're more inclined to take some bold moves and focus on solutions, as opposed to the more incremental or problem-focused lens that we get when we think about, well, I'm here today and I'm trying to get to the top of Everest. Here's, how I'm going to approach that. So appreciative inquiry can be a really valuable tool and some really great deep conversations to have with people on your team, not only in figuring out what success looks like, but building a path to get there. One way to capture what success looks like is what we call a scorecard for success. This is our tool and framework when we're working one-on-one with CEOs, leaders, executives, teams. What are the key focus areas? You'll notice there are only 3. What are the key buckets or themes? What are the goals within those? What are the measures, lead and lag? And then how are we going on those? Whatever framework, whatever structure works for you, absolutely fine. Use it. Yeah. The scorecard framework for us is usually what 3 focus areas are key, 20% to drive 80% of impact, what 3 goals within each of those, and striving to achieve those over 3 months, 3 by 3 by 3. It's a real focus in simplicity and clarity, empowering back focus. Thinking about leadership as an outcome and measuring success, are you clear on the lead indicators as well as the lag indicators? Often we will set KPIs or measure outcomes based on the outcome, which is that lag. A classic example here is sales revenue. Yeah, that's the outcome that you want to achieve. But what are the inputs, the milestones, or the things that move first? What's the activity? In other words, the lead indicator that's going to help you get to that. Managing and leading on lead indicators can help you have a much more positive, rich conversation with the people that you're following, particularly if those KPIs or those targets or those outcomes aren't being met. It means that you can get ahead of issues before they arise, and it gives you a nice short-term way to recognize, acknowledge, and reward success. And the more you can do that, the more you can spot those green shoots of positivity and trending in the right direction, those new growth. The more you can do that, the more traction you're going to be able to get. Yeah. So are you measuring lead indicators as well as lag indicators? Do you know what they are for the key things that you're trying to drive or that you want your team to achieve? It's also important to be realistic about the current baseline of performance. So where are we currently at, and what is a stretch? Absolutely, but a reasonable stretch. How am I going to help my team feel a sense of success, particularly over the short term? That fires confidence, that confidence fires momentum and motivation, and through those levers we can get stronger performance and stronger outcome. Once you've got all of that, then what are the key behaviors that are going to bridge the current performance to future performance, that future desired state? We like to talk about that as good to great. How do we get from where we are to where we want to be? The clearer you are on goals, measures, indicators, and what success looks like, the more targeted a conversation you can have about that. And you'll notice that's a very solution-focused, very future-oriented, very positive conversation. It's not about all of the roadblocks, the issues, the excuses, the boundaries that might have meant that we've struggled to date, or we maybe haven't had the wins that we want to have. We're really saying, what can we control and what are we intending to do about it? This is an example of a completed scorecard. Now, as I mentioned before, you can have whatever structure you like around defining what success looks like. This is something that we find works for us, works for our clients. We've used a sales manager role here as the example. It's a really classic one, an easy one, sometimes to talk about the metrics, particularly lead and lag. the more sales calls you make, generally the more sales you make, right? Not all functions, roles, not all examples are this straightforward. Yeah, but how can you put some measures around it, even if it is a self-report, even if it's a daily, weekly reflection on I feel like I'm getting traction or not, or I'm doing more or less of this particular thing, or a milestone. All of those things can be really helpful in managing the process. So last time, how are you going right now in terms of demonstrating leadership as an outcome? Do you feel like this is something that you're really clear on, that your team are really clear on? If you were to ask the people that you are leading, what does success look like? What are our priorities right now? What are you working on? Do you think you would get a really clear, concise answer? I'll just give you a moment to jump into the poll. Thanks, Holly, for launching that one for us. Vinjay's a 9, nice. If you like, you can obviously also, write down your answer here. Certainly, I think some industries, some roles, some areas are this feels a little bit easier. Yeah, I worked in retail for quite a while, and in terms of store performance and sales and behaviors, some of that's just pretty straightforward. Yeah. In some other areas, absolutely, fundamentally not so much. All right, how are we looking, Holly?
Sitting around a 5.
A 5, yeah. Yeah, not too surprising. I think this is one that certainly our experience is that it's a little bit harder. It's not so much of a focus, or it's definitely a potential area for improvement. So whether it's having some of those appreciative inquiry conversations, whether it's just asking the people that you're leading, what do we think success looks like here? Building a scorecard format or doing something else, what are 1 or 2 commitments that you might be able to make to get a clearer sense of success in terms of leadership as an outcome? Beautiful. All right. So we have talked about the power and impact of ongoing meaningful contact in driving your leadership impact or performance. That is the one main lever that the Marshall Goldsmith research suggests you can pull to up-level your leadership and help drive performance of the people that you are leading. We've talked about 3 pillars that you can look at your leadership through. There's leadership as a relationship, leadership as a process, and leadership as an outcome, and with some tips and tricks and tools that you might be able to use to up-level those elements if that's something that you feel you need to do. Leadership as a relationship is certainly where I would start. That gives you the foundation and almost kind of buys you the right and the opportunity to engage in some of those other conversations. Thinking about what we've talked about, can you just capture some thinking, 5, 2, 3, what is tips, tactics or tools, things that you might want to do differently starting this afternoon or starting tomorrow? Now, I really encourage you to think small here, and that might sound counterintuitive. And by that, I mean, what might you be willing to commit to that you can consistently do over the medium to long term? Yeah. Often we'll commit to these big audacious things and we can do it for a week or 2 and then other priorities take over and we lose our focus. Yeah, which is perfectly reasonable. Small, regular, consistent actions, building rhythm, routine and habits is a much more powerful way of achieving sustained up-leveled success. So with that lens, what are 1, 2, 3, you could go for 5 tips, tricks that you might want to add to your playbook here? I also mentioned earlier that there's a leadership is a contact sport assessment that we've created for you. It's a quick 5-minute survey. We'll share the link with you post this session. You can jump in, have a play, and automatically receive a report back, which will share with you where you might be sitting at currently. So if you want a little bit more of a baseline, if you want something to kind of hold on to or explore those concepts a little bit more, then that absolutely might be something that interests you. That's our complimentary value add for everyone in our community. So that's absolutely an option. Okay. And we are pretty much bang on time to tackle some questions. If you haven't dropped a question into chat yet, if there's something that you'd really like to clarify or ask, please do that now. I'm going to just check in with Holly about what those questions might be.
So we've had one from Vijaya, who has asked, increasing the 51% to provide the real connection. So how does a leader ensure that this doesn't inhibit a connect initiative from the team? So it may become a habit for the team to expect with the 51%.
Yeah, right. Okay. So I think what you're asking is how do you make the move first without creating a sense of not reluctance, but just the team constantly expecting you to go first all the time. Yeah. So first of all, I think reflecting on what our part in any situation is really powerful, yeah, and taking ownership of that, I think it is also really powerful. So that applies in a range of contexts. I would be signposting and saying, look, this is something that's sitting in front of us. I'm going to own this bit, yeah, and I really want us to solve this. And it's something that, you know, we've essentially created together, or we've come to this point together. So here's what I'm willing to contribute or take ownership from. What do you think your 51% is? What do you think your contribution is here, and how do we work forward together? Sometimes by talking about that, what's your 51%, and I've certainly seen teams and organizations where that's become a bit of a mantra, actually role models to your team how they can do that. Owning the bits and segregating it. I think that's a great idea. Yeah, perfect. Cool.
Vijay has also asked, how do we set up a scorecard without spending too much time on it?
That is a really good question. I think that setting up a scorecard is a really great example of slowing down to speed up. Yeah, and I'm very conscious, because I feel it too, that most of us have lots of demands on our time, and creating the space and the time to be able to dive into something like that feels like something that we can't really do. I would challenge that and say it's actually an investment, not an expense. At the same time, you can focus on a couple of elements of the scorecard. For example, you might start with focus areas and clear goals, and maybe sort of leave it there. I really think having some measures is important, but that might be enough for now. Yeah, get a bit of success around that. You might also take that defining success or outcome, that success scorecard, and apply it to a particular initiative or a particular project, rather than trying to do it overall. Find something that might be a little bit more straightforward. It's just sort of the question around, can HR help you do that? Sometimes, absolutely, yes. If you've got an HR business partner or someone along those lines, if you've got a coach or a mentor, if there's someone in your network who is really strong at being able to conceptualize those things and put measures in place, and absolutely get their support. Ultimately, I would say as a leader, it is a muscle and a skill that is well worth learning and knowing how to do. We have scorecards for each of our team members that we update on a monthly basis. Yeah, here's the key focus areas and goals. Here's the key measures. How did I go on that? So I would be careful about hoping that somebody could do this for you and deliver it to you. Really lean into that co-creation piece, because the conversation is really valuable, really powerful, and where you get a lot of the alignment. Great. Beautiful. Any other questions, Holly? No? We're just scrolling through comments. Perfect. Well, hopefully that means that we've been able to answer all of those along the way. We will be sharing with you post this session a copy of the recording, the link to the Leadership is a Contact Sport assessment, and please do dive in, have a play with that. Let us know what you think, whether it's useful, and you're more than welcome to share that with people in your team and your community as well if you think that that is powerful. If after this session, I know we've got a million things, many of you are probably multitasking, and certainly some of you I know are eagerly awaiting for the recording because you're a double book today. If you have any questions, if you're starting to play with something and it's not landing, please do reach out to us. It's really important for the team here at EPP that we feel like we're contributing to our community and being very generous with what we know and supporting people to up-level their leadership. So please don't be shy about reaching out and messaging us, be it on LinkedIn or more directly, if we can support you in your leadership growth journey. Beautiful. All right, thank you so much, everybody. It's been lovely to have you on live, and to those of you watching the recording, thank you so much too. Benjay will put an email in the follow-up communication for you so you know how to reach out. Perfect. All right, thank you so much, everybody. Yes, we will send the recording to everybody. We'll get that to you in the next 24 hours. Beautiful, beautiful. All right. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day and all the best in up-leveling your leadership. Cheers.